At 37 years old, Curtis Tambwe made exactly $44,200 a year as a county librarian for the city of Baltimore. He was a man who found deep satisfaction in the quiet order of the Dewey Decimal System, in the crisp rustle of a turning page, and in the specific, almost sacred duty of preserving stories. His life was measured in small, reliable increments: the 6:14 a.m. alarm, the 22-minute drive to the library in his 2009 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it, the taste of the $1.50 coffee from the staff room machine. He believed in structure, in evidence, and in the fundamental goodness of a well-told tale. He had no idea his own life was about to become a story of devastating betrayal, a narrative meticulously plotted by the two people he should have been able to trust most in the world. The scene of his execution was not a dark alley or a corporate boardroom, but the suffocatingly opulent dining room of his mother-in-law's $1.9 million Victorian mansion in Roland Park. The air was thick with the scent of lilies from a $260 centerpiece that cost more than Curtis's bi-weekly grocery budget. The mahogany table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier, each facet reflecting the cold, rehearsed expressions of his wife, Monique, and her mother, Lorraine Gentry. Monique stood, her hand resting delicately on the back of her $200 dining chair. She was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost half a month's rent on the small apartment she shared with Curtis and their daughter. Her face, usually a mask of casual indifference, was set in a look of grave, theatrical seriousness. Curtis recognized it as the same expression she wore when watching a particularly dramatic television show. "Curtis," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. Lorraine sat opposite, a proud, reptilian stillness in her eyes, like a director watching her star pupil hit their mark. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about our future." Curtis waited, his hands resting in his lap. He could feel the cheap cotton of his $30 Old Navy trousers against the expensive upholstery of the chair. We want different things," Monique continued, glancing at her mother for a sliver of reinforcement. "Our values are different. Our goals are different. I need a partner who is ambitious, who is building something. You're content. And that's fine. For you." Each word was a carefully polished stone, designed to build a wall between them. So, after much consideration, she took a deep, dramatic breath. "I think this marriage is over." She delivered the line with the finality of a guillotine. She expected a collapse. She expected pleading, anger, a scene. Lorraine certainly did. Her lips were curled in a faint, triumphant smile. They had practiced this moment, timed it, lit it perfectly. They had prepared for every reaction except the one they got. Curtis looked from his wife to his mother-in-law. He saw the whole performance for what it was. He thought of his 6-year-old daughter, Sade, safely at home with a sitter he was paying $15 an hour for, money he'd have to account for carefully. He felt a profound, hollow calm settle over him. He picked up his heavy linen napkin, wiped his mouth with a slow, deliberate motion, and placed it on the table beside his half-eaten plate of catered sea bass that cost $75 per person. He met Monique's shocked gaze. "I agree," he said, and in the 2 seconds that followed, as he stood, pushed his chair in, and turned to walk out of the room, he watched her face change. The mask of rehearsed confidence dissolved, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. He hadn't followed the script. The audience had just walked out of the theater. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. He just left, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him, leaving them in the silent, expensive tomb they had built for his life. They had no idea that the real story was just beginning, and he was the one who had already read the ending. What do you do when you find out your life is a lie? Do you scream? Do you break things? Or do you just quietly start taking notes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because Curtis's journey is one you won't want to miss. The facade of their life had been built on Curtis's quiet labor and Monique's escalating demands. Their two-bedroom apartment in Remington, with its $780 monthly rent, was a constant source of her complaints, yet she contributed nothing to its upkeep, either financially or domestically. Curtis's salary, while modest, was the bedrock of their existence. It paid the rent, the $112 monthly electric bill, the $68 for internet, and the approximately $450 a month for groceries. He was the one who woke up early to pack Sade's lunch, carefully cutting her sandwiches into star shapes with a $2 cookie cutter, because it made her smile. He would lay out her clothes for school, an outfit that might consist of a $14 t-shirt from Target and $20 jeans from Old Navy, and then he would gently wake her, his deep voice a soft rumble in the quiet of the morning. While Sade ate her $3 box of cereal, Curtis would make his own breakfast, 2 slices of toast with peanut butter, a meal that cost less than 75 cents. Monique, in contrast, would emerge from the bedroom an hour later, already on her phone, dressed for her job as a consultant, a vaguely defined role at a downtown marketing firm that seemed to involve more long lunches than actual work. She'd grab a $6 latte from the Starbucks on Lexington Avenue on her way out, the cost of which Curtis mentally logged against their tight budget. "Don't forget I have that client dinner tonight," she'd say, not looking up from her screen as she applied a final coat of $40 Dior lipstick. "I'll be home late." This was the rhythm of their days. Curtis would drop Sade at school. His old Honda, a familiar, reliable presence in a line of much newer, more expensive SUVs. He'd spend his day at the library, a haven of peace and knowledge, where his work gave him a sense of purpose that money couldn't buy. He'd check out books, manage databases, and help patrons navigate the vast ocean of human thought, all for a wage that Monique openly scorned. After work, he'd pick up Sade, her small hand fitting perfectly into his. Their conversations were the highlight of his day. She'd tell him about her art project, about the boy who pulled her braids, about the story the teacher read. Her world was vibrant and full of wonder, and Curtis was its primary custodian. Back at the apartment, the evening routine would commence. He'd cook dinner, simple, nutritious meals, chicken and rice, spaghetti with a meat sauce he made from scratch, tacos. The ingredients for a week's worth of these dinners rarely cost more than $100. While the food simmered, he'd sit with Sad at their small second-hand kitchen table, a $75 piece from a thrift store, and help her with her reading. He had filled their small apartment with books, not expensive new hardcovers, but used paperbacks from the library's annual sale, costing $1 or $2 apiece. He built Sade a bookshelf out of $20 worth of milk crates he'd painted a bright, cheerful yellow. It was her treasure chest. Monique would arrive home around 9 or 10, smelling of expensive perfume and restaurant food. She'd offer a cursory kiss to the top of Sade's head and then retreat to the bedroom, complaining of exhaustion. She rarely ate the food Curtis had saved for her. "Another client thing?" he'd ask gently. "You wouldn't understand, Curtis," she'd reply, her tone laced with a familiar, weary condescension. "It's about networking, building a brand, things that happen outside of your little world of books." He saw the signs, of course. He wasn't blind, just hopeful. There was the $2,400 Burberry dress she'd brought home one day, claiming a wealthy client had given it to her as a gift. There was the white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car that appeared one afternoon on a lease he was sure they couldn't afford. "My mother helped with the down payment," she'd said dismissively when he'd questioned it. "She wants me to have something reliable, not like that thing you drive." She gestured to his Honda with a flick of her wrist, as if shooing away a fly. He tried to talk to her about their finances, about starting a college fund for Said, about saving for a small house. He'd print out spreadsheets, showing their income and expenses in neat columns. Monique would glance at them and laugh. It was a soft, cruel sound. A budget? On your salary? Curtis, that's adorable. Some of us have ambitions that can't be contained in an Excel spreadsheet. He'd retreat, wounded but unwilling to fight. He told himself she was stressed, that her job was demanding. He told himself that her ambition was for their family, for Said. He clung to the memory of the woman he had married, the vibrant, funny woman who had once loved visiting him at the library, who had said she loved the way his hands smelled like old paper and knowledge. That woman was gone, replaced by this stranger who looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. But Said was here. And for Said, he would endure anything. He would cook the dinners, read the stories, and maintain the fragile peace of their home. He had no idea he was merely the unpaid custodian of a stage set, a domestic facade designed to be demolished the moment he was no longer useful. The cruelty wasn't a single, sudden act. It was a slow, escalating campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts, each one meticulously administered by Monique, often with her mother Lorraine providing the script. The outrage accumulated in Curtis's heart like a debt, each insult another line item he was forced to carry in silence. One Tuesday evening in February, about 4 months before the dinner, Curtis sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and his laptop. He'd spent an hour crafting a new budget, one that was even tighter, but would allow them to put away $150 a month for Said. It required sacrifices, fewer takeout meals, which only he and Sadeh ate anyway, switching to a cheaper internet plan, cutting out his one luxury, a $12 monthly subscription to a history magazine. He felt a quiet pride in the plan. It was responsible. It was for their daughter. Monique walked in, tossing her $1,800 Louis Vuitton handbag onto the counter with a thud. She glanced at the screen. "What's this? More of your little numbers?" "It's a new budget," Curtis said, trying to keep the hope in his voice. "If we stick to this, we can save almost $2,000 a year for Sadie's college." Monique laughed. It wasn't a joyful sound. It was sharp and brittle, like shattering glass. $2,000? Curtis, do you have any idea what college costs? My mother spent more than that on the catering for her garden party last summer. That's not a plan. That's a rounding error. She leaned over, her perfume, a scent that cost $320 a bottle, enveloping him. Some of us have ambitions, real ambitions, not this. She waved a hand around their small, tidy living room, at the worn but comfortable $150 thrift store couch, at the framed photos of Saad, at the life he had so carefully built. "You're playing house, Curtis. I'm trying to build an empire." He felt the familiar sting of shame, the hot flush of humiliation. He closed the laptop. "It's a start, Monique." "No," she said, her voice dropping to a cold, flat tone. "It's an end. It's the end of the line. This is what you'll be doing for the rest of your life, counting pennies while the world moves on." She turned and walked into the bedroom, leaving him alone with his useless numbers and the echoing silence of her contempt. A few weeks later, they were at Said's parent-teacher conference. Said's teacher, a warm, energetic woman named Mrs. Albright, beamed at them. "Said is just a marvel," she said. "Her reading comprehension is 2 grades above her level. Whatever you're doing at home, keep doing it. She talks about her daddy reading to her every single night." Curtis felt a surge of pride so pure it almost brought tears to his eyes. He glanced at Monique, hoping to share the moment. Monique smiled a polished, political smile. "Thank you. I try to make sure she's surrounded by the best books. I'm always buying her new ones. It's so important to invest in their education." She completely absorbed the credit, positioning herself as the architect of their daughter's success. Curtis sat in stunned silence. He was the one who scoured the used book sales. He was the one who spent hours in the evenings, his voice growing hoarse, as he did all the character voices for Sade. Monique hadn't willingly opened a children's book in years, but he said nothing. To argue in front of the teacher would be a betrayal of the unified front he thought they were supposed to maintain for their child. He just nodded. A silent, invisible partner in his own daughter's upbringing. Lorraine's visits were the worst. She would sweep into their apartment like a health inspector, her eyes cataloging every perceived flaw. One Saturday, she arrived unannounced, wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than Curtis's monthly salary. "I was just in the neighborhood," she lied, her eyes scanning the living room. "Sade, darling, come give Grandma a kiss." She hugged Sade, then immediately began her subtle assault. "Curtis, there's a chip in the paint by the door frame. You should really take care of that." She ran a manicured finger along the top of a bookshelf. "So much dust. It's just not healthy for a child." She looked at the worn armchair where Curtis read to Sade every night. "That thing looks like it might collapse. Sade deserves to grow up somewhere with standards, a certain level of quality." The implication was clear. He was not providing it. He was failing. Later, after she'd left, leaving behind the lingering scent of her judgment, Curtis overheard Monique on the phone with her. "I know, Mother. It's just a few more months." "No, he doesn't suspect a thing. He's too busy playing house." There was a pause. "Yes, the accounts are ready. You were right. It's the only way to ensure Sade has the life she deserves. He won't know what hit him." Curtis's heart pounded in his chest. Accounts? A plan? He told himself he was misinterpreting. He told himself it was just Lorraine's usual meddling, her endless schemes to get Monique to leave him. He couldn't let himself believe the alternative. It was too monstrous. So he pushed the words down, burying them under the familiar weight of denial. He had made a critical mistake. The final blow before the discovery came on his own birthday. It was a Thursday. He had hoped for a quiet family dinner, maybe a cake he'd bake himself. Instead, Monique announced they were going out to a new, trendy restaurant downtown her mother had recommended. When he saw the prices on the menu, his stomach clenched. A single entree cost $60. He ordered the cheapest thing he could find, a $22 pasta dish. Monique ordered the lobster, a market price item, and a $90 bottle of wine. She was wearing a new pair of Christian Louboutin shoes, the signature red soles a flash of scarlet under the table. They were an $800 pair of shoes for his birthday dinner. At the end of the meal, she slid a small, flat envelope across the table. "Happy birthday, Curtis." He opened it. Inside was a gift card to Barnes & Noble for $40. "I figured you could get yourself something nice," she said, a magnanimous smile on her face. "I know things are tight for you." The condescension was a physical force, pressing the air from his lungs. She had just spent hundreds of dollars on a meal and shoes, and she was gifting him a pittance, framed as an act of charity. He looked at the gift card, then at her. He saw the chasm between them, no longer a crack, but a vast, unbridgeable canyon. He wanted to scream. He wanted to stand up and walk away. But then he thought of Sade, at home with the sitter, and the image of her sleeping face. Her braids fanned out on the pillow, held him in his seat. "Thank you, Monique," he said, his voice quiet and even. "It's very thoughtful." He pocketed the gift card, a $40 symbol of his own erasure. He knew in that moment that he was already a ghost in his own life. He just didn't know yet that he'd been robbed too. The discovery came not with a bang, but with the cold, silent glow of a smartphone screen at 6:14 a.m. on a Monday morning. Curtis, a man of unwavering routine, had just woken up. The apartment was still and dark, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Sade was asleep in her room, and Monique hadn't come home from her alleged work retreat over the weekend. Before starting the coffee, he did what he did every Monday. He opened his PNC Bank app to check that his direct deposit from the library had cleared on Friday and to plan his expenses for the week. He tapped the icon. The app loaded. He stared at the screen. Checking account balance, 1102s. He blinked, thinking his tired eyes were deceiving him. He closed the app and reopened it. The number remained stark and brutal. 1102. It couldn't be right. His bi-weekly paycheck of $1,840 after taxes had been deposited just over 60 hours ago. He'd paid the rent online Friday morning, a transfer of $780. That should have left him with over $1,000, plus the small buffer he always kept. A knot of ice formed in his stomach. He scrolled through the recent transactions. There was the direct deposit. There was the rent payment. And then there was a list of transfers. 16 of them, all made to an external account he didn't recognize. They were dated over the last 5 months, but the most recent ones, the ones that had drained his paycheck, had happened over the weekend. Transfer to account ending in 4057, $500. Transfer to account ending in 4057, $500. Transfer to account ending in 4057, $340. His breath hitched. He scrolled up, his thumb shaking. The transfers went back for months, $2,500 in March, $3,000 in April, small, regular withdrawals, then larger ones, all to the same account. The total was staggering. He did the math in his head, his librarian brain automatically cataloging and calculating. It was tens of thousands of dollars. His first thought was fraud, identity theft. Someone had hacked their account. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a problem-solving instinct kicking in. He called the bank's 24-hour helpline. After navigating a frustrating automated menu, he finally spoke to a dispassionate customer service agent in a call center thousands of miles away. "Sir, I'm looking at the activity," the agent said, his voice tinny. These transfers were all authorized digitally using the secondary user's login credentials and password. "Was that your wife? A Monique Tambwe?" The world tilted on its axis. The knot of ice in his stomach shattered into a million sharp pieces. "Yes," he managed to whisper. "Well, from the bank's perspective, these are not fraudulent, sir. They were properly authorized. If you believe your wife has made these transfers without your consent, that is a domestic issue. You'll need to speak with her or contact law enforcement." A domestic issue. The phrase hung in the air, clinical and devastating. He ended the call, his hand trembling. He sat on the edge of his bed in the pre-dawn gloom, the phone feeling like a block of ice in his palm. He had to get Sade ready for school. He had to go to work. He had to pretend that his world hadn't just been systematically dismantled. The day was a blur. He moved through his tasks at the library on autopilot, shelving books, answering reference questions. The familiar routines a thin veil over the chaos raging inside him. Every patron he helped, every book he scanned, felt like a scene from someone else's life. During his 30-minute lunch break, he didn't eat. He drove his 2009 Honda Civic to the PNC branch on North Avenue, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He sat across from a young bank teller named Maria. He explained the situation in a low, controlled voice, trying to keep the desperation from cracking it. He asked for printed statements of all activity for the last 6 months. Maria's professional expression softened with sympathy as she typed at her keyboard. "I can do that for you, Mr. Tambwe," she said gently. The printer behind her whirred to life, spitting out page after page. She collated them, stapled the thick stack, and slid it across the counter. "It looks like 16 major transfers, sir." He thanked her, his voice hoarse, and walked back to his car. He sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, the midday sun casting harsh shadows across the worn dashboard. The rain from the night before had passed, but the world felt gray and washed out. He looked at the top page. Account holder, Curtis Tambwe, Monique Tambwe. He began to read. Each line was a nail in the coffin of his marriage. March 12th, digital transfer, authorized by M. Tambwe. Amount, $20,500, now it's March 28th. Digital transfer, authorized by M. Sir Tambwe. Amount, 1-800 Miles, April 15th. Digital transfer, authorized by M. Tambwe. Amount, $3,000, routers, and on it went. A meticulous record of theft, disguised as finance. The weekend's transfers were at the end. The final, brazen cleanup. The grand total was printed at the bottom of a summary page he hadn't even seen yet. He did the math himself first, adding up the 16 withdrawals. $38,600. $38,600. The entirety of their savings. His paychecks bled dry, week after week. It was the money for a down payment on a house. It was the start of Said's college fund. It was every sacrifice he'd ever made, every extra shift he'd picked up, every small luxury he'd denied himself. All of it siphoned away into an unknown account, authorized by his wife's hand. The paper in his hands felt impossibly heavy, the weight of a betrayal so profound it had its own gravity. He sat there in the silence of his old car, the scent of stale coffee and library books mixing with the bitter taste of truth, and for the first time, he let a single tear trace a path down his cheek. Then he wiped it away, his jaw hardening. The time for grief was over. The time for strategy had begun. The hours after the discovery were the longest of Curtis's life. He returned to the library and finished his shift, his movements precise and automatic. He smiled at patrons. He reshelved a cart of history books, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. But behind his calm exterior, a cold, methodical anger was taking root. He knew he couldn't confront Monique. Not yet. A confrontation would be emotional, chaotic. It would give her the scene she and her mother had expected. He needed something better. He needed evidence. He needed a plan. That evening, he went through the motions of their broken domestic life. He picked up Said from school, her bright chatter a painful counterpoint to the silence in his own head. He hugged her longer than usual, burying his face in her hair, which was neatly plaited in twists that smelled of coconut oil. He needed to feel the solid, undeniable truth of her in his arms. He was in the middle of making spaghetti, a $7 meal of pasta, ground turkey, and a jar of sauce, when Monique walked in. She was glowing, relaxed from her work retreat, which he now knew was a lie. "Hey," she said, dropping a $300 weekend bag by the door. Traffic was a nightmare. She glanced at him. "You look tired." The audacity of it stole his breath. He was tired because his life savings were gone, stolen by the woman asking him the question. He forced a smile that felt like a grimace. "Long day. We got a big donation of old periodicals. A lot of shelving." The lie came surprisingly easy. It was the first of many. "Sounds thrilling," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She disappeared into the bedroom. At dinner, Sadie did most of the talking, her 6-year-old world beautifully simple. Monique scrolled through her phone, occasionally murmuring, "That's nice, sweetie." Curtis ate, the food tasteless in his mouth. He felt like a spy in his own home, every normal interaction now fraught with a terrible, secret knowledge. The next day, the charade continued. As he was getting ready for work, Monique emerged from the bedroom, yawning. "Hey, I'm planning a spa day with the girls this weekend. Can you transfer me a couple $100?" she asked, as if it were the most normal request in the world. Curtis froze for a second, his back to her. He was tying his shoes, a simple, mundane act that suddenly felt monumental. He had $11 to his name. He had to say something. He had to lie. He took a breath and turned, a neutral expression fixed on his face. "Sure," he said, his voice steady. "I'll get to it tonight. Paycheck just cleared, so I need to sit down and make sure all the automatic bills are covered first." "Okay, just don't forget," she said, already distracted by a notification on her phone. He felt a wave of nausea. The ease with which she demanded money she knew he didn't have, money she had already stolen, was sociopathic. He left for work, the lie sitting like a stone in his gut. He was playing dumb, buying time, and every second of it was agony. The breaking point, the moment that galvanized his resolve from cold anger into diamond-hard determination, came that Wednesday evening. He was helping Sade clean her room before her bath. She was putting her stuffed animals away when she picked up a book from her nightstand. It was a brightly colored picture book about a friendly dragon. She walked over to him, holding it out. Her brow was furrowed in confusion. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and serious. "I found this. This was on my nightstand. Did Mama try to return you?" Curtis stared at the book. He didn't recognize it. He turned it over. The spine had a library sticker, but it wasn't from his branch. It was from the Roland Park branch, the one near Lorraine's mansion. A cold dread washed over him. Monique must have taken Sad there during one of her visits to her mother, checking out a book to maintain the illusion of being an engaged parent. The book getting mixed up in Sad's things was a simple mistake, but Sade's question, her innocent, devastating interpretation, it sliced through all his defenses. In her world, things you got from the library, you had to return. Her mother, who was becoming more and more like a visitor from a distant world, had brought a library book home. In Sade's perfect 6-year-old logic, she had connected the two. If her mother could return a book, could she also return her father? He knelt, his knees cracking on the floor. He pulled his daughter into a fierce hug, his eyes burning. He held her tight, the dragon book pressed between them. "Oh, baby girl," he whispered into her hair. No, never. You can't return people, especially not Daddy's. I am not a library book. I am yours always." She hugged him back, content with his answer. But as he held her, Curtis understood. Monique and Lorraine didn't see him as a husband or a father. They saw him as a temporary item, something to be used and then discarded, returned to whatever shelf they thought he belonged on. That little girl's question, born of pure love and confusion, was the most honest assessment of the situation he had heard. He tucked Sade into bed, read her 2 stories from their own collection, and kissed her goodnight. Then he walked into the living room, sat down at the small kitchen table, and took out the stapled bank statements from his work bag. The time for playing dumb was over. He was no longer a husband pretending everything was fine. He was a father, protecting his child, and he was a librarian. He was about to show them what a man who commanded the world of information could do. The library had always been Curtis's sanctuary, a place of quiet contemplation and orderly knowledge. Now it became his war room. The day after Sade's heartbreaking question, Curtis used his lunch break not to eat, but to fight back with the most powerful weapons at his disposal, a keyboard, and a librarian's intimate knowledge of public record databases. His access, granted to him as a senior librarian, went far beyond a simple Google search. He could tap into LexisNexis, Westlaw, and state and municipal databases that were prohibitively expensive for public use. He sat at his cataloging terminal in the library's quiet basement, the air smelling of old paper and binding glue. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were steady on the keyboard. He started with their apartment. He knew the property management company. He logged into the city's register of deeds, searching for the address on Remington Avenue. He found the original lease agreement from 3 years ago, his name and Monique's listed as co-tenants. Then he kept digging. He found it. An amended lease agreement, filed 2 months ago. His name was gone. Monique was now listed as the sole lessee, the change to be effective on the 1st of the following month. The document had been signed digitally by Monique and a representative from the management company. They had legally removed him from his own home without his knowledge. The document stated the reason for the amendment was a change in household composition, a sterile phrase for a brutal act of erasure. He downloaded the PDF and saved it to a secure flash drive he'd bought that morning for $15. His hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. Where did she think he would go? Did she expect him to just vanish? The cruelty was breathtaking in its thoroughness. Next, he navigated to the state's judicial case search portal. He typed in their names. Nothing came up under Tambwe v. Tambwe. He paused, thinking. He remembered the phone call he'd overheard. Monique talking to her mother, Lorraine's constant interference. He entered a new search, Gentry vs. Tambwe. A result appeared. A single case file, pre-filed in family court but not yet served. His blood ran cold. He clicked on it. Petitioner, Lorraine Gentry. Respondent, Curtis Tambwe. Subject, emergency motion for temporary custody of minor child, S. Tambwe. He felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. He downloaded the attached motion, a 12-page document. His eyes scanned the text, his brain struggling to process the venomous, calculated lies. The respondent, Curtis Tambwe, has a history of financial instability, making him unable to provide a suitable environment for the minor child. This, while Monique was systematically draining their bank account. The respondent has shown signs of emotional volatility and has created a stressful home atmosphere. He who cooked every meal and read every bedtime story was being painted as a monster. The respondent is expected to voluntarily abandon the family home on or before the 1st of next month, leaving the minor child in a precarious situation. They hadn't even kicked him out yet, but they had already documented his abandonment in a court of law. It was a perfectly constructed trap. They were going to have him served with these papers the day after he was locked out of his own apartment, leaving him homeless, penniless, and fighting for his daughter from a position of manufactured weakness. At the bottom of the document was the name of the attorney, a high-powered lawyer from a firm in the Inner Harbor, a firm whose partners billed at over $200 an hour. And then he found the receipt, filed as an exhibit, a retainer agreement. The petitioner, Lorraine Gentry, had paid a $4,500 retainer fee to the law firm to initiate the action. The payment was dated March 14th, 2 days after the very first large transfer out of his and Monique's joint account. It was all connected. The theft was the seed money for the character assassination. He saved the motion, the retainer agreement, and the lease amendment to his flash drive. He now had a timeline. He had proof. He had a story, not the one they had written for him, but the true one, documented in their own digital footprints. That afternoon, he left work an hour early, using his personal time. He went to a legal aid clinic he'd found online, one that offered pro bono services for family law cases in a small, unassuming office above a laundromat. He met with a young, sharp-as-a-tack attorney named Aisha Roberts. She was a black woman, with her hair in elegant locks, her eyes intelligent and direct. Curtis sat across from her at a simple metal desk and, without emotion, laid out his story. He didn't editorialize. He just presented the facts. He handed her the flash drive. Here is the bank statement showing withdrawals of $38,600. Here is the lease amendment removing me from my home. And here is the emergency custody motion filed by my wife's mother, paid for with the first of the stolen funds. Aisha plugged the drive into her laptop, a well-used machine covered in stickers. She read the documents in silence, her expression growing harder with each page. When she looked up, her eyes were blazing. "Mr. Tambwe," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury, "this is not a domestic dispute. This is a conspiracy to commit fraud. This is a calculated, premeditated act to render you destitute and strip you of your parental rights. This custody motion—" She shook her head in disbelief. "It's not just baseless, it's perjurious. I can see at least 3 claims in here that are provably false based on the evidence you've just given me. Claiming you're financially unstable while they're the ones stealing your money? That's not just audacious, it's legally actionable." For the first time in days, Curtis felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was hope. "The clinic will take your case," Aisha said, her voice firm. "We will file a response that will not only have this motion thrown out, but will petition for sanctions against both your wife and her mother for filing in bad faith. We will go after every single dollar they took. They thought you were a quiet librarian. They're about to find out what happens when you try to cheat a man who respects the facts." Curtis nodded, a wave of gratitude washing over him. He had walked into this small office feeling like a victim. He was walking out as a plaintiff, armed with the truth and a warrior to help him fight. The fee for an attorney like Aisha would normally be $350 an hour, an impossible sum for him. But today, justice was free. The strike began with an act of profound, weaponized calm. The invitation to dinner at Lorraine's house came via text from Monique a week after Curtis had met with Aisha. "Mom is making a special dinner Saturday night. She wants us all there. Don't be late." Curtis knew with chilling certainty that this was it. This was the night of the scripted execution. Aisha had advised him on the strategy. Let them play their hand. Do not engage. Do not give them the drama they crave. He arrived at the Roland Park Victorian at precisely 7:01 p.m. He had paid a trusted fellow librarian $60 to watch Sade for the evening, ensuring his daughter was miles away from the impending toxicity. As he walked through the massive front door, he was struck again by the sheer opulence of the house. It wasn't a home. It was a museum of wealth, cold and impersonal. The air was thick with the scent of lilies from the $260 centerpiece on the mahogany dining table, a floral arrangement that cost more than a week of his groceries. Silver cutlery, heavy and ornate, gleamed next to bone china plates. Lorraine greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore a deep blue dress that probably cost $500. Monique stood beside her, a vision in a cream-colored sheath dress, a $900 piece of clothing for a dinner meant to destroy her husband. They were dressed for a funeral, his. Dinner was an agonizing performance of false civility. Lorraine asked about the library with feigned interest. Monique talked about a fictional business trip she had to take next week. Curtis answered in short, polite sentences, eating the expensive catered sea base, which he knew cost $75 a plate, with a steady hand. He was an actor in their play, but he was the only one who knew the secret, final act. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Monique stood up. She placed her hand on the back of her $200 dining chair, a gesture of practiced gravity. She looked at Curtis, her face a mask of sorrowful resolve. "Curtis," she began, her voice catching with rehearsed emotion, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About our future." Curtis watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw her glance at Lorraine, a quick, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement passing between them. We want different things," Monique said, hitting her marks perfectly. "Our values are different. Our goals are different. I need a partner who is ambitious, who is building something, you're content. And that's fine. For you. She took a deep, dramatic breath, her chest rising. So, after much consideration, I think this marriage is over. The final line landed in the silent room. Monique and Lorraine both watched him, their bodies tensed, waiting for the explosion. They expected him to argue, to break down, to beg. They had a script for his devastation. Curtis held their gaze for a long moment. He felt the weight of all the lies, all the thefts, all the insults. And he felt the power of the truth stored on a $15 flash drive in his pocket. He picked up his heavy linen napkin, slowly wiped his mouth, and placed it neatly on the table. He looked directly at Monique, his voice quiet but carrying across the cavernous room. I agree. He stood up, the legs of his chair making no sound on the thick Persian rug. He pushed the chair in, his movements deliberate and final. The shock on their faces was a masterpiece of silent cinema. Monique's mouth fell slightly open. Her rehearsed composure crumbled, revealing a raw, startled confusion. Lorraine's triumphant smirk froze, then curdled into a look of disbelief. This was not in the script. He hadn't fought. He hadn't pleaded. He had simply agreed. Without another word, Curtis turned and walked out of the dining room, through the grand foyer, and out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, a sound of absolute finality. He had let them fire their shot, and he had refused to fall. He left them there, surrounded by their expensive props and a failed plot, suddenly realizing they had lost control of the narrative. The real confrontation, he knew, was scheduled for Wednesday at 10 a.m., and it wouldn't be in their theater. It would be in his. The second act of the strike took place in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of the branch manager at the PNC Bank on North Avenue. It was the same branch where Curtis had sat in his car and absorbed the full, crushing weight of the betrayal. This time, he was not alone. Aisha Roberts sat beside him, a slim leather portfolio on her lap, her presence radiating a calm, formidable competence. Monique arrived at 10:05 a.m., 5 minutes late. She was dressed in what she clearly considered business attire, a sharply tailored but needlessly expensive $1,500 blazer and designer jeans. She looked annoyed, her expression communicating that this meeting was an inconvenient interruption to her important life. She clearly believed this was a formality, perhaps to divide the remaining pittance in the account or close it. Curtis, Aisha, she said, her nod curt. Let's get this over with. I have a lunch meeting at noon. The bank manager, a stern, older black man named Mr. Harris, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Please have a seat, Miss Tambwe. His tone was devoid of warmth. Once she was seated, Mr. Harris began. We are here to review some significant activity on the joint account ending in 8675. The bank's fraud and security department has flagged these transactions, and Mr. Tambwe has raised a formal dispute. Monique's mask of annoyance shifted to one of confusion. Fraud? What are you talking about? There's no fraud. Mr. Harris didn't respond to her. Instead, he swiveled a large computer monitor on his desk so it faced all of them. He clicked his mouse. The first transaction appeared on the screen, a clean, undeniable line of text. March 12th, Mr. Harris read aloud, his voice a steady, damning monotone. A digital transfer of $2,500 to an external account ending in 4057. The transfer was authorized at 11:43 p.m. using the login credentials of Monique Tambwe. Here is the digital signature and IP address stamp. A glowing green check mark and a string of numbers appeared next to the line. Monique's face went pale. That was for a joint investment, a future fund. Mr. Harris ignored her and clicked again. March 28th, a digital transfer of $1,800. Authorized by Mr. Tambwe. Click. April 15th, $3,000. Authorized by Monsieur Tamboué. He went on, line by line, for all 16 transfers. Each one was read aloud, a steady drumbeat of her crimes. The amounts, the dates, her name repeated like a verdict. Monique shrank in her chair, the color drained from her face. Her confident posture collapsed. She looked from the screen to Curtis, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. He met her gaze without expression. When Mr. Harris finished the final transaction, leaving the grand total of $38,600 glowing on the screen, the room was utterly silent. Then, Aisha Roberts leaned forward and slid a document across the polished desk. It was the emergency custody motion. "And this," Aisha said, her voice sharp and clear, "is the motion you and your mother filed with the court, dated March 14th. It claims Mr. Tamboué is financially unstable and poses a risk to his daughter. It's an interesting claim, given that you paid your lawyer's $4,500 retainer 2 days after you began systematically draining the family's life savings." Monique stared at the court filing as if it were a snake. Her carefully constructed world, built on lies and a sense of superiority, had been demolished in under 10 minutes by a series of verifiable facts. She was speechless. The script her mother had given her had no lines for this scene. Curtis, who had remained silent the entire time, finally spoke. He leaned forward slightly, his voice not loud, but it filled the entire room. "You took $38,600, Monique," he said, the number precise and cold. "I just have one question." She looked at him, her eyes pleading now. This was the man she had called unambitious, content, a penny pincher. This was the man she had tried to erase. "Which transfer?" he asked, his voice breaking with a tightly controlled sorrow. "Was for Sade?" The question hung in the sterile air of the bank office, a final, devastating judgment. There was no answer. There couldn't be one. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, Monique Tamboué began to cry. They were not tears of remorse. They were tears of a thief who had just been caught. The consequences of that 10-minute meeting at the bank did not just ripple outwards. They cascaded, a relentless, systematic dismantling of the life Monique and Lorraine had so arrogantly built. The downfall was not swift and dramatic, but a slow, grinding erosion of their money, status, and power, each loss enumerated like the bank transfers had been. First came the legal collapse. Armed with the bank records and Monique's silent, tearful admission, Aisha Roberts filed an emergency counter motion. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had seen every kind of family court drama, was incandescent with rage when she reviewed the evidence. The Gentry versus Tamboué custody motion was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. The judge's written ruling was scathing, describing the filing as a malicious and fraudulent abuse of the judicial process. Monique and Lorraine were formally sanctioned for perjury and filing in bad faith, a black mark on their permanent legal record. In a subsequent hearing, Curtis was awarded immediate, full, and sole legal and physical custody of Sade. The judge looked at Monique and said, "You did not act to protect your child. You acted to weaponize her. This court will not allow it." Second, the financial ruin began. The PNC Fraud Department, acting on the evidence and the formal dispute, froze all of Monique's known accounts, including the one ending in 4057, where she had stashed the stolen money. Aisha filed a civil suit for conversion and fraud on Curtis's behalf. The evidence was so overwhelming that Monique's high-priced lawyer, seeing no viable defense and not wanting to be associated with blatant perjury, advised her to settle immediately. A judgment was entered against Monique and Lorraine jointly for the full $38,600 plus 8% interest and an additional $15,000 to cover the assessed value of Curtis's legal fees, which the clinic would use to fund other pro bono cases. To satisfy the initial part of the judgment, Monique was forced to sell her beloved white BMW 3 Series. She got $29,000 for the $43,000 car, the depreciation a bitter pill to swallow. The remaining debt hung over her and her mother, their assets subject to liens. Third, the housing trap they had set for Curtis snapped shut on Monique instead. Curtis, through Aisha, sent a copy of the fraudulent lease amendment and the court's ruling to the property management company. Faced with evidence that they had been duped into an illegal contract modification, the company immediately voided the amendment. Furthermore, citing a morality clause in the lease regarding fraudulent activity, they terminated Monique's tenancy altogether. She was given 30 days to vacate the apartment. With her bank accounts frozen and her credit ruined by the civil judgment, she had nowhere to go. She was forced to pack her expensive clothes into designer suitcases and move back into her childhood bedroom in Lorraine's $1.9 million mansion. Fourth, the social fallout decimated Lorraine. The matriarch who had bankrolled and masterminded the scheme found her own world crumbling. News travels fast in wealthy, tight-knit communities like Roland Park. The story of the powerful Lorraine gentry conspiring to defraud her working-class son-in-law and steal her own granddaughter was a delicious piece of gossip that spread through charity luncheons and country club dinners. It was one thing to be divorced. It was quite another to be a documented cheat and perjurer. Two of the prestigious charity boards she sat on quietly asked for her resignation, citing the need to avoid any potential controversy. Old friends suddenly became unavailable for lunch. The $4,500 she had paid her lawyer was a sunk cost, a monument to her own hubris. Her carefully curated reputation was in tatters, destroyed not by an outside force, but by her own venomous plotting. Finally, there was Monique's personal collapse. Stripped of her independence, her money, and her daughter, she was now completely reliant on the mother whose plan had failed so spectacularly. The dynamic in the Roland Park mansion turned toxic. Lorraine, humiliated and financially entangled, blamed Monique for her sloppy execution. Monique, lost and broken, blamed Lorraine for pushing her into a plan that was supposed to be foolproof. The house, once a symbol of their power, became a gilded cage of resentment and recrimination. In the weeks that followed, Curtis's phone, which had been silent, began to fill with a series of voicemails from Monique, each one a different stage of her breakdown. The first was confused justification. "Curtis, you don't understand. I was doing it for us, for Sade. I was building something you were too scared to build." The second was angry pleading. "You can't do this. You can't take Sade from me. After everything I did for you, the judge will see I'm her mother." The third was desperate bargaining. Okay, you were right. I'll give you the money back, all of it. Just tell the judge it was a misunderstanding. We can fix this." The fourth was a tearful, incoherent message left late at night, full of blame for her mother and a pathetic, self-pitying sorrow. Curtis listened to each one, his face impassive. He saved them to the same flash drive as all the other evidence. He never once replied. Her words were no longer part of his story. They were just noise from a world he had already left behind. A year can change everything. It can turn a landscape of wreckage into a garden. For Curtis and Sade, it was a year of quiet, steady rebuilding. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a new, more authentic life had begun to grow. They moved out of the Remington apartment, a place now tainted with the ghosts of lies and betrayal. With the recovered funds and his own careful savings, Curtis was able to afford the down payment on a modest but beautiful two-bedroom row home, a few blocks away, still in the neighborhood he loved. The monthly mortgage at $250 was manageable on his librarian's salary, a fact that gave him a deep sense of pride and security. The house had a small patch of earth in the back, which he and Sade had turned into a thriving garden full of tomatoes, cucumbers, and a riot of sunflowers. The house wasn't filled with expensive furniture or designer objects. Instead, it was filled with life. Sade's drawings, vibrant and joyful, were taped to the refrigerator and framed on the walls. The milk crate bookshelf, which Curtis had carefully moved from the old apartment, now occupied a place of honor in the sunny living room, overflowing with books from the library. The air smelled not of expensive perfume, but of baking bread and the rich soil from their garden. It was a Saturday afternoon in late September, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Curtis was at his branch of the Enoch Pratt Free Library, catching up on some work. He had brought Sade with him, a common weekend practice. She loved the library, seeing it as an extension of her home, a palace of infinite stories. Today she had given herself a very important job. She was sitting on the floor in the children's section, surrounded by a cart of freshly returned picture books. With intense concentration, she was organizing them on a low shelf, not by author or title, but by the color of their spines. A stack of red books, followed by orange, then yellow, then green. "It's a rainbow, Daddy," she said, looking up at him, her face beaming with accomplishment. Her braids, threaded with new blue and green beads that clicked softly as she moved, bounced with her excitement. "The shelf looks better like a rainbow." Curtis knelt beside her, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost ached. She was creating beauty and order from a jumble of returned items. The metaphor was not lost on him. "It's the most beautiful shelf in the whole library, baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper, folded into a neat square. He unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing Sade had made for him a few months ago, his most prized possession. It depicted two figures holding hands under a smiling sun. One was tall, the other small. She had used a dark brown crayon for their skin, pressing down hard to get the color just right. When she'd given it to him, she had said, "This is you and me, Daddy. We're the Tambwe team. We're black and we're the best." He looked at the drawing, at the simple, profound declaration of their bond and their identity. And then he looked at his daughter, happily building her rainbow of books in a public space, a space built for everyone, regardless of their income or status. In that moment, he thought of Monique and her mother, trapped in their cold, silent mansion, a $1.9 million prison of their own making. He thought of their frantic obsession with money, with brands, with the appearance of wealth. They had believed value was something you could buy, something you could wear, something you could steal. They had tried to measure his worth by his salary and found it lacking. He looked at Sade, her small hands carefully placing a blue book next to a green one. He realized that true wealth was not in a bank account. It wasn't a number on a screen or a logo on a handbag. True wealth was this. It was the weight of a child's hand in yours. It was the quiet joy of a Saturday afternoon spent building a rainbow. It was the integrity you refused to sacrifice and the love you fought to protect. It was a well-worn library card in your wallet, a key that unlocked the entire world, not a credit card that just bought pieces of it. We often think that strength is about fighting back with equal force, but sometimes the greatest power lies in quiet resolve and unwavering integrity. Curtis chose to fight with facts, not fury, and in doing so, he didn't just win custody of his daughter, he won back his life and discovered what true wealth really means. What does true wealth mean to you? Let us know in the comments, and please remember to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of resilience, justice, and the enduring power of love.